So I'd be much more comfortable doing this if you and I could be in a room together and if you could just ask me some questions. But these are strange times. So I have kind of written this and been thinking about this as if you were here with me. And so we'd probably start with a conversation that said, well, what's your name? And I'd say, I'm Cecilia. And you'd say, well, where are you from? And at that point I'd get a little bit stuck, because by the time I was 6 years old, I was living in my third house. And so I just say I'm from Northern Ireland. We'd moved around a lot. And I said, well, why? And I said, well, my dad was a minister. He's been a minister really all of my life until he retired a few years ago. And you might say, oh, so that's why you're a Christian. And I might ask you then, well, do you just believe everything your mum and dad believed? Do you have a faith because your mum and dad had a faith? Or maybe you don't have a faith because your mum and dad didn't. But it's a legitimate question, and it's one that I suppose I've asked myself a number of times. I wanted to try and get a picture to help you understand what I mean when I talk about being a Christian or having a faith. And I was making dinner a couple of weeks ago, and I was putting on our kitchen hob, and it goes, it's a gas hob, and it goes click click, and then it goes whoosh when the spark lights. And when I look back on my faith story, I think every Christian has a click-click moment. Some of us, it takes us a very long time. Sometimes the clicking goes on a long time, but all of us have a moment when whoosh, the flame is lit. And I was really young when that happened. But when it happened, I did understand. I understood that God was real. I understood that He loved me. I understood that I did stuff where I messed up and got things wrong, and I knew that somehow Jesus needed to die to take away what was called sin. I knew that He could forgive me, and I knew that I wanted Him to be with me, to be my friend for all of my life, and I knew I wanted to be with Him when I died. Now, if you're watching this, you won't have the same click-click moment as me, because I was so young. I was only about 4 or 5, and I'm hoping all the 4 and 5-year-olds are in bed by the time this is shown. So I guess your faith story is going to be different from mine. And I think you'd be right to ask me, how do you know that moment was legitimate? You were so young, it seems ridiculous. And I would say to you, I know it's real because 40 years later, the flame still hasn't gone out. In fact, I'd say it's a supernatural thing, because although the flame has burned brighter at sometimes, and sometimes the flame has got very low to the point where you're having to get down and really look for it, it's never gone out. And I thought maybe I'd talk to you about some of those times when I've been really aware of what was going on, if you like, with the flame in my life. So I'm going to take you to when I started university. I arrived in Dundee, and it was 1993. And to be honest, I was a bit battered. I was a little bit bruised. I had got my A-level results, and they were shockers. It wasn't going to plan, and I had accepted a course through clearing that I didn't really know very much about, but I thought it was better to get on and do a university degree than resit. Very quickly, there was a relationship that broke down, and I was living in a house with 12 girls. I didn't get to go into the halls I wanted to, and to be perfectly honest, I was just feeling a bit lonely. And I was asking the question, is my faith real? Is it my own? Do you know, I have lived my all of my life following Jesus, but is it just because it was what my mum and dad did? All of a sudden, the flame felt very, very low. And I didn't really know what to do. And I thought, well, I'll just, do you know what, I'll drag myself to church, and I will drag myself to, I knew there would be a Christian union, because I knew there would be people there, and I would find friends probably. But that immediately attracted attention from my housemates, and they suddenly started to ask me lots of questions, and I needed to answer the questions, and I answered them as best I could, but I wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't feeling the faith bit. And yet a strange thing happened, because as I answered their questions, then I would cry out to God at night. I was like, God, I can't even answer these questions. I can't answer them properly. And then I would go away and I'd read some more, and then I would talk with the Christian friends I'd made, and all of a sudden then just the flame started to grow brighter again. And my experience at university was the questions never stopped. I did 5 years in the end, and I was questioned pretty much, if not daily, at least weekly, either from classmates, eventually from tutors. By the time I was doing my placement as a social work student, I was getting asked by my supervisors. And over time, what I noticed was that I got bolder about answering the questions. But also what I noticed was that when people asked me the questions, they didn't have the answers themselves. And when I looked at their lives, there wasn't much in their lives that I wanted that I couldn't have. In fact, I was now engaged, and I had a relationship that was really deep and meaningful. I had friendships and people that I could rely on in church and in Christian Union that they didn't have that experience of. God was helping me. And God was at work, and he was at work everywhere whenever we were at university. Some of you will have listened to my husband Steve's story a few weeks back, and I was part of the group of people that was praying for him, and I watched as God worked in his life. And that was happening to friends of ours all sorts of times. And he seemed to be at work everywhere with lots of different people. So you might say to me, Cecilia, that's very nice, but that's not my experience of Christians or of church. Do you know, after all, the church covered up the abuse of kids for years. And then there's my personal experience of being hurt by Christians. And you know, I can't pretend to you that stuff didn't happen. I can't even pretend to you that some of that stuff happened somewhere else in the church. I know of people convicted of really horrific things in the church, in my evangelical circles. I knew people in churches that I'd been part of who were violent and who were abusive to their wives, who terrorised their kids. And then there was also the people that I'd met over the years who were just really creepy, who made my hair stand on end. And so I had a funny relationship with church. On the one hand, there were people that I loved and who loved me, and there were also people that I really struggled to be around. But I'm a follower of Jesus, and that means being part of the church. If you're part of the church, if you're following Jesus, you are part of the church. You're part of this family. I can choose which family gathering to go to, because that's what happens on a Sunday. I can choose which part of the extended family I regularly meet up with, but I can't choose whether I'm part of the family or not. And what do I know about the family? I know them really well now. I know that we're a group of not perfect, and actually some of us are really deeply flawed people. Like any family, there are sexist uncles and racist aunties. There's the gossiping cousin, and there's the backbiting granny. You can't be around church and not meet them. And sometimes I'm them. And you know, on the days that I judge them, I've just become the proud older sister who's judging the people who are also in the family. Can I say, whatever your experience of church, or whatever your experience of Christians, don't let them and don't let me stop you from your journey of trying to meet with God. How do you know if somebody's in the family? I gave up trying to judge that a long time ago. I can't see into people's hearts. I can't see, if you like, the DNA of belonging to this family. That's God's job. What I have seen is the goodness of God in the people in the family. I've had the real privilege of going overseas and seeing people in China and in Hong Kong who I just had this link with, this unity with, this bond with, because they were part of the family. And it was really incredible. So, yeah, next question. That might be lovely for you, Cecilia, but I just can't believe in a God who allows so much awful stuff to happen in the world. And I might say to you, well, there's awful stuff happening in the world, whether you choose to believe in God or not. How are you coping with suffering in the world? What's your answer? I can't pretend that suffering doesn't happen. In fact, I find it overwhelming sometimes, the amount of suffering I see. I mentioned a wee while back that I trained in social work. And over the last 20 years, I've worked with children who've been abandoned by their birth parents. I've worked with women in refuges who've experienced horrific violence. I've worked for 10 years with children and young people living with a cancer diagnosis. And now I have the privilege of working with refugees who are fleeing war and persecution, young people who've experienced trafficking. I can't pretend that suffering doesn't happen. Most of it is people doing awful things to other people. What I do know now, though, is I know God, and I know what he tells me. He says, Cecilia, this world was never meant to be this way. He allowed us as humans to choose whether to trust that he knew best. He allowed us to choose whether we would follow him. He didn't create robots. But we thought, and we still think, that we know better. And so when I ask God, why do you allow that? Part of what I'm saying is, God, I think I could do better. I think I would do it differently. I know best. In your life, do you always get it right? Do you always make the right decision? Have you never hurt somebody? Have you never caused somebody pain? No. But the temptation is that I say, well, I just don't get it as wrong as they do. God should do something with them. God should take control of them, just not me. I can't control what others do with God. I can only take responsibility for my relationship with him. Is he allowed to take control of my life? Am I surrendering my life to him? Am I setting down my desire to control everything and everyone else to trust him? So when I see suffering, what do? Well, I look inside me and I see that God has given me gifts. He's trained me over the years to be able to ease some suffering and some distress. He has given me a heart that is capable of compassion and patience, and I'm called to use that. I'm called to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with him. But I see my failings and my limitations. I am not going to bring an end to suffering in the world. I look around and I see God's people doing amazing things, and I see people who don't know God but who still are filled with compassion, who are working for justice, who are helping the poor, who, like our NHS heroes, have put themselves on the line to ease suffering and distress in our world. But it's never going to be enough. It's not going to bring an end to suffering. And then I think about the times in my own life, the tough times, and I realise that often those were the times when I knew God's presence and God's strength. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about a really dark time for me. We had 2 miscarriages in 7 months. And the first miscarriage was hard physically, the second one was hard emotionally. And I remember a very particular night, a really dark night, a few weeks after that second miscarriage, when Steve and Ewan were asleep and I was spiralling. I'd been crying for hours. I had got myself in a state. I felt like they would be better off without me. And then there was a voice. It's about 4 o'clock in the morning. It was like a voice saying, Cecilia, you know that is not true. You know that you need some sleep. And I'm telling you to go and see a doctor tomorrow. And by a miracle, and it was a miracle, I fell asleep. And by another miracle, I woke up the next morning and I was able to get an appointment with my doctor. And I met a lovely man who just said very quietly, Cecilia, you are grieving, you are sad and you are tired. You need some medication, but you're going to be okay. And I will see you in 3 weeks. On the Sunday, I literally dragged myself to church. I don't remember anything of what was said. I don't remember who I met, but I do remember that at one point we sang an old hymn. It's a hymn that says, Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed your hand has provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Now there was no miracle that day. The sadness didn't lift immediately, but I knew that God was there. I knew that he cared. I knew that he saw me. He lifted my eyes from me and what was going on around me, and he lifted them to him. Most recently, at the start of lockdown, and I'm recording this as after about 12 weeks of lockdown. Right back at the start, I took sick. I was breathless, really breathless. It was probably COVID-19. I wasn't able to get a test, but it was scary. And in the middle of still being sick, my aunt died. She lived in England with my granny, and she died suddenly. It wasn't COVID related, but it was devastating and it was complicated. Lots of things were just difficult about getting family who needed to be with my granny to her. And we would have a funeral that was held with just my dad, his sister and my granny, their minister and an elder from the church, just the 5 of them, and the rest of us watching in the most surreal way via Facebook Live. There's another old hymn. I've been around church a long time, that says, I am not skilled to understand what God has willed or what God has planned. I only know at his right hand stands one who is my saviour. My aunt loved Jesus. I don't know why she died then. I don't know why I got COVID-19 and why I got sick, but I didn't get as sick as others. But I know that, in fact, I am convinced that, like Paul when he writes in Romans, that neither death nor life, neither things in the present or things in the future, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ. You will face suffering. You probably are facing suffering. All of us are facing COVID-19. I am deeply grateful that I get to walk through it with Jesus. I've had to choose just a few bits of my story. If I were to answer all of your questions, or if I was to tell you of all of the times that God has guided in the big and the small, the times that he has provided when there seemed to be no way, we would be here all night. Mine is not the story of a blazing transformation. I'm still slightly jealous of the people who get to go click, click, and it blazes brightly, and the change is so dramatic that everybody can see. But I still think that my story is miraculous. I have a faith that was simple enough for a child to understand, but a God who is big enough to withstand the big questions and the challenges of life. There's a song that sums up my faith story that I have loved listening to during lockdown. My brush with COVID-19 drew my attention to the line, "With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God." Do you know there's lots of references in the Bible reminding us that ultimately it is God who gives us breath. The song is called "The Goodness of God." Have a listen. Thank you.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire and darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness